Hi, I'm Martin Wall. Welcome to the Climate Diplomacy Podcast. The Sustainable Development Goals were launched with much fanfare in 2015. Comprising of 17 goals, 169 targets and 224 indicators, some have argued that they risk overreach by trying to be all things to all people. Not only that, but the world has changed a lot since 2015. Leaders who drove the composition of the SDGs have moved on, and the implementation of them is not a priority for their successors. Some would likely not mourn their passing. Despite this, the Sustainable Development Goals are the most ambitious and comprehensive plan for planetary health and human development ever devised, and map out a vision for a sustainable future. But who will drive these goals forward? A new edited volume by Adelphi looks at the role that foreign policy practitioners have in providing leadership for the delivery of these goals. I sat down with one of the editors of this volume, Daria Ivleva, to discuss what she thinks foreign policy needs to do to ensure the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Welcome, Daria.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me here.
To begin, for people who aren't so familiar with the SDGs, can you explain what they are and how they've come about?
The SDGs are a global agenda for a sustainable transformation. The SDGs comprise 17 goals altogether, and these 17 goals touch upon the three dimensions of sustainability. You can see them as social goals, economic goals, and also environmental goals.
These were signed in 2015. It's 4 years on from then. Why do you think a volume like the one that you have produced is so important, and maybe tell us a little bit about how it came about?
Well, precisely because we haven't reached the progress we were hoping for 4 years down the road. This is why we need the volume like ours, and we need more engagement from different policymakers, obviously, but also from the foreign policy specifically. The thing with the goals is that it's a very ambitious agenda, and it touches upon very many aspects of human development, but it is also, as one of our authors, Ollie Brown, says, all things to all people. So it is a very, very broad agenda, but it also risks not having anyone in charge. And this is why we're stating that foreign policy makers need to see their role clearly in achieving those goals and drive them forward very ambitiously. To make those points, which are very important in this point in time, we are very happy to cooperate with different organizations, such as the Chatham House, the Center on International Cooperation at the New York University, the OECD, the TMG Think Tank for Sustainability, and the CDP. All those exciting experts contributed their own perspective and on one of the dimensions of the SDGs with which foreign policy can help.
So that is the main argument of this piece, of the volume, that diplomats and foreign policy have a strong role to play in providing foresight and guidance for the SDGs. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean here? What can these diplomats, foreign policy practitioners do, and why should they be doing it?
Sure. Of course, sustainable development goals are an agenda for everyone. And I mean that quite literally. Ideally, every citizen, every enterprise, every policy area should work to support the SDGs. And it's a huge agenda. And this is exactly the situation we're facing. We don't have much time. We have a huge transformation through which we need to go collectively. And with this task that seems to be insurmountable sometimes, we really need the support and the leadership by foreign policy. In the first place, and quite obviously, it is an international agenda. It is a global agenda that needs strong multilateral structures to be implemented, which means that we need quite a lot of negotiation, quite a lot of talk, quite a lot of trust also to drive this agenda forward. The thing is that it can be claimed that the national level is also the most important level. So in the end, the agenda is not binding. So every state that signed it actually has to implement it nationally. But on the other hand, it cannot be just implemented nationally. It also needs international cooperation, and we need to make sure that this international cooperation is happening. So the first thing is that we need to keep the multilateral structures going and healthy and strong. The second reason is maybe a more specific one, and that is that Sustainable Development Goals will help us, if implemented, keep our world safe and resilient. And this is, of course, a core goal of foreign policy. So by preventing environmental degradation, by helping overcome the big social issues of our time, and by building healthy economies, we will ultimately help prevent crisis and help build peace where currently there is none.
In the chapter that you write with Benjamin Pohl and Alexander Müller, you give a number of examples of how these challenges are playing out in practice across food, agriculture and ecosystems, to transboundary waters, to energy systems. Can you expand on some of these examples?
Let me just talk about food security and agricultural policies. Much of the agricultural policy and policies to secure food supplies used to concentrate on producing a lot of food, but increasing production and keeping the costs as low as possible is just one dimension of achieving food security. And as a matter of fact, we have seen that this focus is far too narrow and actually leads to negative consequences. For instance, it can have deteriorating impacts on livelihoods, on smallholders, and of course, it can damage, or it does a lot of damage to natural resources such as water or soil, and harms biodiversity. Why foreign policy makers need to care about this is that if you destroy livelihoods, or if livelihoods of people are in danger, those people might feel that they need to migrate to secure their livelihoods, which could lead to movements of population between rural and urban areas. When these people get to urban areas where problems already exist, and where public institutions are already having difficulties coping with the needs of the people, this can actually exacerbate the situation. So it doesn't have to happen that way, but it is a mechanism that is sometimes in place, and this is just one reason why foreign policy makers should be interested in achieving sustainable food systems that optimize well-being and protect natural resources.
Okay, so we've heard some of the reasons why foreign policy practitioners should be more involved in driving the SDGs forward. Can you identify some ways in which they can do this?
Well, if the general goal that we're talking about here is that foreign policy needs to be truly sustainable, there are, of course, a lot of things that can be done and that have to be done, but let me just concentrate on one or 2 points. We are talking a lot about how the 2030 agenda is an integrated agenda and how the different goals need to work together, but also how different institutions need to work together, and how we make sure that everybody is going into the same direction. So one specific point that we raise is that a portfolio analysis of foreign policy could be helpful. So what can be done is that the different guidelines and strategies and initiatives of foreign policy can be analyzed in terms of how they interact with the SDGs, and what are the entry points of making them more aligned with this agenda. On the other hand, the foreign policymakers, of course, have a huge convening power. They can bring together not only different governments, but also other sectors of society. They can bring private sector to the table. They can help keep the space for civil society more open. And this is something that needs to be done. For instance, the last essay of this volume states that foreign policy needs to turn its attention to leveraging private sector capacities and potential to achieving SDGs by, for instance, changing the ways of supporting foreign direct investment. And the third point that I would also like to mention here is that, of course, foreign policy, it's not just policy that goes outside the state. It is, of course, the policy that connects the national interests and the national processes to the international interactions. So the foreign policymakers have this power to connect the internal and external dimensions of policy. And they can use this to help make both more sustainable. So they can learn from other countries and from different international contexts how the SDGs are being implemented, what barriers they're facing, but also what are the best practices and what is happening out there, what are the global trends such as decarbonization, changing trade flows, and they can feed all this information in internal domestic processes, helping make internal policies better and more adjusted to the international trends. But on the other hand, they also need to use national policies to leverage sustainability elsewhere.
Okay, thank you, Daria. And that was Adelphi's Daria Ivleva. The volume, Driving Transformative Change, Foreign Affairs and the 2030 Agenda, is now available on the Adelphi website. I'd like to thank the Irish Research Council and the European Commission for helping fund this podcast. I've been Martin Wall. Until next time, thank you.